In the previous years, Ron had discovered through his research that Egyptian history revealed more than ample evidence of the identity of Joseph and Moses in Egypt. The great Imhotep, vizier of King Djoser, was none other than our beloved Joseph. The Egyptian royalty took names denoting their gods. Amenhotep, for example, meant the voice or mouth of Amen. Imhotep meant the mouth or voice of I am. When the Lord told Moses to go to the Pharaoh and bring forth the children of Israel, Moses asked whom he was to say sent him. What is his name? What shall I say unto them? And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent me unto you. It was also Joseph who was the architect of the first pyramids. Another great discovery Ron was led to was how the pyramids were actually built. Herodotus writes of a contrivance the Egyptians used to construct them. Quote, the method employed was to build it in steps, or as some call them, tiers or terraces. When the base was complete, the blocks for the first tier above it were lifted from ground level by contrivances made of short timbers. On the first tier there was another, which raised the blocks a stage higher, then yet another which raised them higher still. Each tier or story had its own set of levers, or it may be that they used the same one, which, being easy to carry, they shifted up from the stage to stage as soon as its load was dropped into place. This passage, combined with a study of hieroglyphics, led Ron to his conclusion. Allowed to construct one of these machines on a pyramid, he demonstrated to the head of the Department of Antiquities in Cairo, Nasif Mohammed Hassan, its operation. Mr. Hassan then showed Ron some pieces of wood they had stored, which they had believed were parts of a boat. But when they tried to assemble them, they couldn't. So they simply placed them in storage. As they examined these pieces, they now knew what they were.
I'm here with us this evening to say a few words about the pyramid building machines is Nasif Hassan. He's the director of antiquities in Egypt, and he will give you an idea of what he believes about these, how the pyramids were built.
I'm very glad to see that this machine, which Mr. Wright showed me, and I think they used something like that.
Real soft place in the earth right under it.
June 16th, 1987. Ron Wyatt and a film crew from the United States of America traveled to eastern Turkey at the express invitation of the Turkish government. The purpose of this expedition was to participate in and film a ceremony which memorialized and commemorated a site located on Doomsday Mountain as the landing site of Noah's Ark. Also, the crew began production and filming of the documentary Noah's Ark Found. The ceremony was the culmination of 10 years of meticulous, painstaking, and often dangerous research by Ron Wyatt and his associates. On this historic occasion of June 20th, 1987, the Turkish government has announced to the world that Turkish archaeological authorities agree with Ron's findings, and that the area under investigation is indeed the landing site of the legendary Ark. This is a joyous, momentous occasion for Ron and his crew. The governor, Turkish authorities, and dignitaries officially dedicate the site, and Ron is allowed to participate as a guest of honor. A visitor center is soon to be built at the site, and the ceremony is completed with the holy sacrifice of a lamb. As each participant places a shovel full of concrete into the first footing, a prayer is said for the lamb's blood to cleanse the earth and keep the area free from evil. The area has been made an international park, and all faiths of the world are welcome to visit and gaze upon the mortal remains of Noah's Ark. The site of the Ark is located 11 miles from Mount Ararat, on a smaller sister mountain at 6,700 feet elevation within the mountains of Urartu, which is biblical for Ararat. This saga began in 1977, when Ron began investigating a mysterious boat-shaped object, which had been aerially photographed in 1959 by a Turkish reconnaissance aircraft pilot. This amazing series of photographs show the perfect symmetry of a boat, the exact length and proportions as stated in the Bible concerning those of Noah's Ark. Years of scientific research and analysis by Ron and his associates have revealed evidence that the object is a massive, ancient, man-made ship. Some of the methods of investigation include aerial stereophotography and the science of photogrammetry, which show the boat to be the dimensions as specified in the Bible. Extensive use of molecular frequency generators and magnetometers, which are sophisticated metal detection devices, have revealed perfectly symmetrical patterns within the ship that show man-made internal structural reinforcement. Controlled chemical analysis of samples of the craft show the metals to be highly sophisticated alloys, which can only be man-made. Also, these samples reveal high carbon content, as is found in long-decayed ancient wood.
Here we start getting a longitudinal bulkheads. Here.
The most conclusive evidence of all are the subsurface radar results. The readings show that internally there are massive keelsomes, deck timbers, open chambers, gunnels, and other various configurations which identify the structure as that of a massive ship. As electrifying as this find and evidence may be, it is not the only strong evidence in the region giving reason to believe that this area is the resting place of the Ark. As Ron begins his search, he meets, befriends, and talks to villagers. The mysteries of the region begin to unfold. This leads Ron to an amazing series of discoveries. He finds 8 enormous anchor stones, all weighing several tons each. They are all identical in shape and size, and all are in alignment with the ship on Doomsday Mountain. All are marked in a similar fashion with 8 iconographic crosses, which Ron and other experts believe refer to the 8 survivors of the flood. The placing and alignment on the stones tells of their relationship to Noah and one another.
Like all the other grave markers in this area, the Valley of the Eight, this marker once had 8 crosses. Now these are a beautiful representation of the ornate Byzantine cross dating back to approximately the 3rd century AD. The large cross representing Noah is especially ornate. The one representing his wife is quite a beautiful design. Now we have the matched pairing here, the eldest son and his wife. These crosses are of the ornate style. We have this cross here that represents one of the sons beyond the first son, and it matches with this one. Up here we have the representation of the other son, but the representation, or the cross representing his wife, is missing and apparently got broken away over the years.
These anchors are similar to drogue-style anchors found in the Mediterranean, which were used for centuries and millennia. Chemical analysis of these stones show them to be made of a type of stone not indigenous to this region. These massive stones were used to help guide the vessel and keep it on an even keel during rough weather. Also, they are of the proper weight and size in proportion to the ship. In addition to the stones, the villagers tell Ron that the village one of the stones rests in is called the Place of 8. Also, the valley the village rests in is known as the Region of 8. None of the inhabitants know how these names came to be. They've been passed down from generation to generation. Again, he clearly finds reference to the 8 survivors of the flood. Ron finds a number of tombstones and markers at the edge of the village, which also have crosses with iconographic representations referring to 8. In addition to these finds, Ron discovers a series of Hurite 3rd millennium BC markings near the ship. He finds that these inscriptions again clearly refer to the 8 survivors of the flood. They depict a raven over a mountain, 8 survivors in a boat, and a mountain ridge exactly above the resting place of the remains of the ship. Once again, here is a strong indication that someone from antiquity has left record of the landing place and survival of Noah and his family. At long last, the mysteries of the legendary story of Noah's Ark begin to unfold. At long last, Noah's Ark found.
Do you believe Noah's Ark actually existed? Could the legend that sounds like a fairy tale really become proven fact? Well, the search has been going on since biblical times. And in a moment, you're going to meet some people who are positive they have found the Ark. Now, we know such claims have been made before. But a few months ago, these people came to 2020 with some new and intriguing scientific findings. We followed them to the mountains of eastern Turkey. And what you'll see is a bizarre adventure with a host of unlikely characters. Tom Gerald's story takes many twists and turns.
That's the seductive beauty that brings them here, snow-capped Mount Ararat. The explorers looked for the Ark there since that's the highest point around here. And as the floodwaters receded, presumably that's where it would have landed. But the Bible describes the mountains of Ararat, mountains plural. Is it possible that the Ark came to rest on one of the smaller sister mountains to Ararat? The boat-shaped site was first found and photographed by a Turkish army captain back in 1959. It was quickly explored and dismissed as a freak of nature. But Wyatt, an amateur archaeologist, rekindled interest in it a few years ago. He brought in Dave Fassel, a marine salvage expert, to assess it. The Doomsday Mountain team brought in some high technology to explore the oldest legend of man. They began scanning their site with a molecular frequency generator. It's a device used by surgeons to pinpoint cancer tumors, and it's been used by Fassel to locate underwater treasure. This time, the molecular frequency generator began to pick up a unique pattern of iron lines beneath the earth.
Okay, bring that one up.
They began placing ribbons along those lines. The finished shape, outlined by the ribbons, was that of a huge ship, the approximate length and width of Noah's Ark, as described in the Bible. The fascinating field of ribbons soon attracted higher academic interest.
That looks like iron. Okay.
Dr. John Baumgartner, a physicist with Los Alamos Laboratories, sent samples back to the lab for analysis and confirmed that the metal they were tracing with the ribbons was indeed iron. With the width and the length known, the only remaining question was depth. By locating the depth of the hull, they could determine if the boat-shaped object had the cargo capacity described in the biblical ark. To resolve this final issue, Wyatt and Fassel brought geologist Tom Finner to Turkey with his company's heavy-duty subsurface radar equipment. Gear like this located the black box cockpit recorder on the floor of the frozen Potomac River after the Air Florida crash.
Suppose this rock were a foot or 2 feet underground. Would it give you a reading as to where that was? Could you locate it?
Yes, we could.
Is it possible that there will be a moment at which you'll say, this is a man-made object?
The symmetry of the feature suggests it's a boat. I hope to prove that the underground structure is in fact that of a boat.
It was here, several miles short of the boat-shaped site, that a waiting game began for Finner and the others. The party needed a final go-ahead from the Turkish government to complete their probe of Doomsday Mountain.
Anyway, we're going to hang in like smell on a skunk till there's nothing left to get this done.
Hanging like the smell on a skunk. The Turkish government stopped the exploration. What now?
Since we were there, Barbara, things have cooled down, and they've sent their own team of scientists in to take a look at this site. It's a very fascinating location.
In August 1985, he receives the necessary permits and clearance to perform the radar examinations. At long last, they perform the scan, and the results are stunning. Before their very eyes, the machine tells the story of what lies beneath the surface of the object. There are massive keelsons, deck timbers, open chambers, gunnels, and other various configurations which Ron and other specialists believe identifies the object as the remains of an ancient man-made ship.
Indeed, there is something beneath that rock besides rock. A radar device developed by Geophysical Survey Systems in Hudson was used on the mountain. The device, called SIR, is used by energy exploration companies to analyze what's below the Earth's surface. According to SIR, something man-made is under Mount Eridog.
This data does not represent natural geology. It's a man-made structure. These reflections are occurring very periodic, too periodic to be random natural type interfaces.
The governor of Ari had Ron demonstrate the radar. When he found what looked like a broken timber near the surface, the governor had it dug up and gave it to Ron to be verified. The lab test revealed organic carbon. It was petrified wood. But the final proof was when it was sectioned. The evidence was obvious. Not only could the internal wood structure be seen, it was also clearly laminated wood. 3 separate layers could be seen. The adhesive material, or glue, had seeped out and hardened on one end and was perfectly aligned with the internal layers.
Our last trip out there this past June, we found this very impressive rivet. And if you'll notice here, the plate itself is just a little more than 1/4 inch in thickness. It's approximately 3.5 inches in diameter, the plate itself, and then the shaft of the rivet is roughly 1 inch to 1.25 inches in diameter. And if you'll notice here, it was struck while it was hot and flared out the end of the shaft so that it would not slide back through the hole in this washer. And this shows that their abilities to use metal was quite advanced, quite sophisticated, and folks, there are thousands of these rivets on this boat. In fact, at every joint where the wooden structures are held together, they're held together by large metal plates which are predominantly iron, and then these rivets.
Good morning. I was just wondering how the size of the structure compared with the dimensions in the Bible.
Okay, Moses was educated in Egypt. We're told that in the New Testament and also in the Old Testament. And the Royal Egyptian cubit, which he was familiar with and we believe used in the giving the dimensions of the ark, is 20.6 inches, and 300 of those is exactly 515 feet, and that is the length dimension of the boat. The boat has splayed some, and this is to be expected in an aging boat. So the width is a little greater than that specified in the Bible, but you figure the degree of splaying and you come up with very close measurements, very similar to those in the Bible.
We're delighted with the results, and at this point in time, personally, I can look anybody in the eye and say that this boat-shaped formation in eastern Turkey is actually the remains of Noah's Ark.
Sodom and Gomorrah, the cities of the plain. In Genesis 19, we read how these cities were destroyed by God with brimstone and fire from heaven, the first biblical record of God's vengeance upon evil since the Great Flood. Ron Wyatt never planned to search for these cities, but in 1989, while working on another project, he was suddenly impressed to stop and examine some odd-shaped, whitish-colored formations along the western shore of the Dead Sea. After driving past these at least 30 or 40 times in the past 12 years, this time they suddenly looked like the shapes of city walls and buildings. Pulling over, he and his crew closely examined these desolate areas. Taking samples of the material, they discovered that they broke right off in their hand and disintegrated into dust the consistency of talcum powder, as Greg Brewer shows us here. In August of 1990, Ron returned to these sites to thoroughly explore them, 5 sites which he had thus far located. I accompanied him this trip along with Marv and Renetta Wilson of Garland, Texas. As we approached the first site we examined, we all could easily see the shapes Ron had described. As no roads led into these areas, we pulled our car off the road and began the long, difficult hike. There was no doubt that these areas were unique to the immediate surrounding area. It was very difficult to walk there, for the loose material made walking an arduous chore. Following what clearly looked like the shape of an outer wall, we soon met with a most breathtaking sight. The wall had ended, and we were now looking down into what appeared to be the entrance into the city. But before we entered, our interest was captivated by a most unusual find. About 100 yards from the entrance, upon a high level, was a singular shape. As we viewed it from all angles, we all agreed it plainly bore the shape of a sphinx. We later found more of these sphinx shapes, which we'll see later in the film. As we entered the open section,
We soon found ourselves walking along very distinctive paths which communicated with one another just as our streets today. As we approached what appeared to be a dead end, we found it turned to the right and continued along until it met another street. There was distinct order here. These were clearly once streets, and along these streets were the shapes of buildings. Even to our untrained eye, the evidence was undeniable. The ziggurat shape near the entrance was almost perfectly preserved. Our research had yielded the fascinating fact that substances burned with sulfur or brimstone had a remaining ash that was heavier than the initial unburned substance. That explained our question as to why the ash of these cities had been able to remain all these 3,900 years. The layering present in all the formations was another positive evidence that whatever these once were, they had been burned at temperatures exceeding 4,000 or 5,000 degrees. This layering effect was the result of thermal ionization. Whenever a substance is burned at extremely high temperatures, the ions of the various substances being burned attract and repel, distorting the flame. Ron drew our attention to features present here which simply do not occur naturally. He showed us a section which revealed a broken double wall which extended toward us at a perfect 90-degree angle. The site we were examining was located at the base of Masada, and soon we all decided that we should go to the top of Masada and film these areas from there. As we took the cable car to the top, the view was breathtaking. The shape of the city was perfectly revealed below us. Here we saw a giant platform-like area, perfectly symmetrical, which was identical to the temple areas of other ancient cities, such as the biblical Shushan or Susa, located in present-day Iran. Then we saw the raised section which we had climbed upon earlier, with the Sphinx shape and the ziggurat. We were all convinced, but we also knew there had to be more evidence than this to convince others.
Now the Bible tells us that it rained fire and brimstone upon the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now what you see in front of you here is the results of large and small, well, varying sized chunks of sulfur, burning sulfur that have hit. And what we find here is that God rained this burning sulfur down upon this city, and rain is a perfect description of it. It landed just in the pattern that rain would fall, and the stuff, of course, the accumulative heat of all of this upon the city set the entire thing ablaze. The flashpoint of every material there, metal, stone, of course the people, and everything burned, and this sulfur continued to burn, and it vitrified the material around it after it had burned it all up, sealed itself off from the oxygen, and then of course smothered itself out. And in each of these little crystalline capsules here is a varying size chunk of sulfur, and there are millions of these in these ashes that we have here. Now some of them we have cracked open so you can see the sulfur inside, and others we have left intact, but there are millions of these here. So this shows that God indeed rained fire and brimstone upon these cities. And if you look in your dictionary, under brimstone, you'll find that it is sulfur.
As soon as he got home from that trip, Ron took several of the samples to Galbraith Labs near Knoxville, Tennessee. The yellow balls in the center of the reddish rings proved to be 95.72% sulfur, with traces of several other elements, all of which he was told would contribute to an extremely high temperature fire. When Ron asked them if they could perform a BTU test to determine the degree of heat this would give off, he was told that they couldn't because it would damage their stainless steel testing chamber. The material surrounding the encapsulated sulfur was also tested and proved to be ash. At home, we did our own small test and burned some of the sulfur in a spoon. The purplish flame is indicative of the intense heat, which prohibited our holding the spoon as it burned. We later discovered our spoon had holes in it from the fire. Then, we placed a small piece of the outer material also in the spoon and attempted to burn it, but it wouldn't burn at all. It didn't even darken. It was already completely consumed by fire, and nothing was left to ignite. In 1978, temporarily unable to continue work on Noah's Ark, Ron Wyatt took his two sons, Danny and Ronnie, to a site in Egypt he believed might be where the Red Sea crossing took place. When they arrived at the site on the Gulf of Aqaba, they found a Phoenician-style column lying on the beach. The water had eroded away the inscription, but in 1984, Ron found a matching column on the opposite shore in Saudi Arabia, still standing, with the inscription still intact. He was later able to translate the words Pharaoh, Mizraim, Death, Edom, Yahweh, and Solomon from this second column, and from this he believes these columns were erected by King Solomon and dedicated to Yahweh for the great miracle of the crossing of the sea on dry land. Israel was occupying the Sinai Peninsula at this time in 1978 and moved this first column from the beach and set it in concrete across the road, as you can see here. Diving at this site, they filmed numerous coral-encrusted chariot parts, such as these two chariot wheels still attached to an axle, one wheel flat on the ground and the other in the air. This is a six-spoked wheel. They found a vast amount of artifacts which loudly attest to the miracle which occurred here. Horse and human skeletal remains are still preserved by the coral, as are chariot cabs without wheels, wheels without cabs, some wheels on axles, and some not. He retrieved a chariot wheel hub, which he presented to Nassif Mohammed Hassan, who was the director of antiquities in Cairo, Egypt. But the most astounding find was this gold-veneered four-spoke chariot wheel, which he was able to video in March of 1988, but he was unable to retrieve it as the wood had disintegrated, leaving only a thin gold shell. There were many factors which led Ron to this site, but three were most compelling. First, in order for the Israelites to have left Egypt proper, they would have had to have begun their journey to the Red Sea on the eastern side of the Gulf of Suez. This left only the Gulf of Aqaba. Second, there is only one place
along the shoreline of the Gulf of Aqaba, which could hold the perhaps 3 million people. This area is so large it can be seen from this satellite photo. And finally, when Ron studied the bathymetric maps of the British Admiralty in London, he saw a perfect underwater pathway led across the Gulf at this point. On either side of this line across the Gulf of Aqaba, the waters were 5,000 feet deep, dropping off like a deep gorge. But here, at this precise spot, was an area leading across which gently sloped at a 6-degree angle to a depth of only 900 to 1,000 feet in the center. As Ron and the boys journeyed across the Sinai to this site, they noticed large boulders pushed over to the sides of the wadis, or canyons, allowing caravans and travelers to pass through. But as they dove into the Gulf, about 1.5 miles out and 200 feet deep, they were thrilled to see this same stone-cleared pathway continued and was still evident in the crystal-clear waters.
Exodus 15:8. And with the blast of thy nostrils the waters were gathered together. The floods stood upright as an heap, and the depths were congealed in the heart of the sea. Now, while we aren't saying that God is limited in the way he can accomplish his purpose, we're suggesting that should he have directed a jet stream down into the sea at the crossing site, blowing from east to west, that this would have driven back the sea and frozen it in place. And the word congealed in Exodus 15:8 agrees with the thought of the water freezing. And then as the pillar of fire passed through between the Israelites and the Egyptians, it could have melted the ice to the point that it gave way when the Egyptian army was in the sea and the Israelites out on the other side.
With the overwhelming evidence of the chariot parts scattered across the Gulf, Ron knew that Mount Sinai was in Saudi Arabia. Studying maps, he saw that Jabal el-Lawz fit the biblical description of this holy mountain. Unable to get a visa to enter Saudi Arabia, Ron and his 2 sons finally decided to enter without one. He had learned that the normal procedure if someone were caught without a visa there was to escort the visitor to the border and see that they did not re-enter. They found Mount Sinai with the altar and much more still intact in this uninhabited area, but as they were leaving, they were abruptly arrested and imprisoned for 78 days, accused of being Israeli spies. When they were finally released, they were told that a man had contacted the Saudi embassy and reported the Wyatts to be Israeli spies pretending to be archaeologists. This man had been a trusted friend who had worked with Ron on Noah's Ark.
Ronald Wyatt and his sons are with us in the studios of our Nashville affiliate WTVF to tell us all about it. Gentlemen, good morning.
Morning.
Mr. Wyatt, you there in the middle, and
Yes.
your sons on either side. Why did you, I didn't know that Mount Sinai was in Saudi Arabian territory. Why did you think it was?
We found some chariot parts that looked like the chariots found in King Tut's tomb in the Gulf of Aqaba, west of this Jabal el-Lawz. We found these at depths from 60 feet out to 200 feet and over a stretch of about 1.5 miles. And we believe that that was the crossing site. And so in the biblical narrative, they arrived at Mount Sinai after crossing the Red Sea. The language in the Bible indicates that they stayed in a mountain, enclosed in a mountain. So an aerial map showed that this Jebel El Lawz had a large valley enclosed in the rim of an ancient volcano. There's about 5,000 acres in there. We felt this was the place. And in Exodus 24:4 and in Leviticus 6:28, 11:33, and 15:12, it tells of some artifacts that were to be found. There was to be 12 pillars of stone and an altar and some pottery. And so this is why we looked at that particular mountain.
Just as the beach on the Egyptian side is certainly large enough to accommodate several million people, here we can see that this beach also contains a tremendous plain. In Exodus 14, verse 30, we read, "Thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the sea shore." In 1984, when Ron and his sons were imprisoned here in Saudi, Ron directed his captors to this beach in a helicopter, where he showed them a Phoenician-style column on this beach with inscriptions in archaic Hebrew that said that King Solomon had erected this column in honor of Yahweh to commemorate the crossing of the Red Sea on dry land. Today, all that remains there is this marker noting the location of that column, and while we do not know where they have taken it, we feel sure it is protected and will be located soon. As we look out into the sea, we can see the end of the tongue of the underwater land bridge, and that it leads across to this very beach just beyond where the column once rested. We find an area which fits the biblical description of Rephidim, the last encampment of the Israelites before they reach Mount Sinai. Exodus 17:6. The Lord tells Moses, "Behold, I will stand before thee there upon the rock in Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it, that the people may drink." And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. This scripture continues to tell of the Amalek attacking the people, and of Moses standing upon a hill with Aaron and Hur holding up his arms. Again, we can see that there is certainly enough area for a great battle to take place here. But the most incredible evidence for this site is the giant split boulder upon a hill with evidence that large streams of water flowed from it. The rocks still display the erosion pattern of tremendous amounts of water descending from this rock. And as we travel through the split in the boulder, we soon can see the channels cut in the rock from the water flow on the other side. And panning outward, we can see these channels continue out into the plain. After the battle, when Israel had defeated the Amalekites, the Bible tells us, as we go to Exodus 17, verse 15, "And Moses built an altar and called the name of it Jehovah Nissi." Here are the remains of a very ancient altar, part of it fallen, perhaps from an earthquake or Bedouins looking for treasure inside. But enough is still intact to show it was indeed an altar, as it is not hollow inside, but solid all the way through. Panning to the left, we see the position of the altar. and the rock at Horeb, just a few hundred yards away, and to the left the high peaks of Mount Sinai. Finally, we can see this majestic mountain where God's own presence once rested. Jabal el-Lawz in northwest Saudi Arabia. In Galatians 4:25, the Apostle Paul tells us, "For this Agar is Mount Sinai in Arabia." Exodus 19:18, "And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire." Could this blackened peak be the result of the consuming fire of God's own presence resting upon it? As we view the holy precinct, the area at the foot of the mountain, we can see a large fence and a guardhouse, which was erected immediately after Ron Wyatt showed this site to a Saudi archaeologist in 1985. This fence follows along the line of 18-foot diameter boundary markers which Moses was directed to erect by God. This sign by the guardhouse states that this is an archaeological site passed by royal decree, and that it is unlawful to trespass, subject to penalty. And as we pan to the left, here we can see where the fence ends on the other side. And now, as we pan away from the holy precinct, we look out into the area of the camp of the Israelites. There are several archaeological remains still here, but this one is of particular interest for us. In Exodus chapter 32, we read of the golden calf and how Aaron fashions it. And in verse 5, "And when Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made proclamation and said, 'Tomorrow is a feast to the Lord.'" There is little doubt that these are the remains of that very altar which Aaron built to the golden calf. When the Saudi archaeologist from Riyadh University saw this, he was very excited. The 12 petroglyphs of cows and bulls captured his interest because they are found nowhere else in Saudi Arabia. The style of their horns and bodies is distinctly ancient Egyptian, the same style found in the temples and tombs of ancient Egypt. Unable to enter the holy precinct from the front and climb upon Mount Sinai, we now approach it from the backside. Climbing the mountain here, we soon find ourselves on top of a large, sheltered plateau. Here we have a better view of the blackened peak. Panning the area, we find it to easily be large enough to accommodate the 70 elders who accompanied Moses up into the mountain at one point in time. And just ahead, over that ledge, lies the holy precinct. Looking down, we see the fence which follows along the bounds set by Moses, and just beyond that fence is part of the camp of the Israelites. Zooming in closer to the holy precinct, we can see the remains of an ancient foundation. And directly adjacent to this foundation are the remains of an altar built of stone. Exodus 20:25, "And thou wilt make me an altar of stone, thou shalt not build it of hewn stone." Scanning further, we stopped to look at the tracks made by the Bedouins' trucks before the fence was erected. This gives you a better idea of the size perspective of the enormity of this area. And here we see the guard building and archaeological sign, which we saw earlier from the front. Returning back to the foundation we saw earlier, the camera begins to pan outward where we will be able to see the location of the altar to the golden calf. Exodus 32:19. And it came to pass, as soon as he came nigh unto the camp, that he saw the calf and the dancing, and Moses' anger waxed hot, and he cast the tables out of his hands and brake them beneath the mount. Still visible today also is the stream bed which descended from the mountain to give the people abundant water for themselves and their flocks and herds. Returning to the front of Mount Sinai, we view again the holy precinct. In October of 1988, Ron returned to Israel to begin excavation again after an absence of several years on the Ark of the Covenant. Since the last time Ron had worked there, the Department of Antiquities had had a complete turnover of personnel and policy. Permits to excavate were tough to get for institutions and tougher still for individuals. But Ron took his crew over and went to apply. He had been told years earlier that his permit to excavate the site was permanent. However, it didn't look so good this time. So he reapplied, and for 3 weeks they all waited. Finally, Ron took the crew to the Mediterranean Sea at Ashkelon to go for a swim in October. Here, Ron stubbed his toe on something in the waist-high water. Diving to see what it was, he discovered the mouth of a giant stone pot. Soon, they discovered the area to be littered with these pots with sealed mouths. Prying one open, they discovered that they were burial pots full of human remains. Ron went directly to the Department of Antiquities with the find. They were greatly excited, for it turned out that these were the ancient Canaanite burial pots of Ashkelon. The great Kathleen Kenyon had bulldozed through the entire Roman level here, searching for the burial site of these ancient people. Yet no one thought of looking just a few hundred feet out in the shallow waters of the Mediterranean. While no one could wonder the significance of this discovery as compared to Noah's Ark or the chariot parts, we must say there is no significance in that respect. However, Ron immediately got his permit to excavate in Jerusalem. Unlike his other projects, Ron was digging in this site based only on a statement he had made one day in 1978 to a head of the Department of Antiquities in Jerusalem. While walking together in this area, they were discussing Roman antiquities when Ron's left hand pointed to a site and he said, "That's Jeremiah's grotto. and the Ark of the Covenant is in there. As soon as the words came out of his mouth, he realized that was the first time he'd ever thought about finding the Ark of the Covenant. He'd never even researched it, much less thought of the possibility of excavating for it. Immediately his companion said, "That's wonderful. We'll not only furnish you the permit, we'll put you up in a place to stay, have your laundry done, and furnish your meals." But Ron was perplexed. The only reason he was in Jerusalem was because he had gotten severely sunburned while diving for the chariot parts in the Red Sea and had come here to await his Apex ticket back home. He told his friend that first he'd have to go home as he was due back at work, and also he had to figure out why the Ark of the Covenant would be in that location. He came back time and time again with Danny and Ronnie and dug throughout the cave system, having little idea where he was even supposed to look. In 1982, he found out. In January of 1982, after steadily digging in a cave system since 1979, he busted through the rock into a chamber which contained a gold table and several other articles which Ron believed to be from the first temple. Then, further back, he saw the top of a stone case which appeared to be the correct size to contain the Ark of the Covenant. Overwhelmed with emotion and double pneumonia, Ron passed out in that chamber for 45 minutes. He knew what was in that case, but now what? He attempted to photograph it with a Polaroid camera, a 35mm camera, and video. In every case, the photos were a whiteout. He returned home to recover and work until he could afford to return. In May, he borrowed a colonoscope and went back. Drilling a small hole through the case, he was able to see enough to positively identify the contents of the stone case. It was the Ark.
On January 6th, 1982, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I broke into a chamber beneath the Calvary Escarpment, north of the city wall of Jerusalem. In that chamber is the Ark of the Covenant, the table of showbread, and several other things that I didn't see. They were covered with animal skins, with boards, and then with stones. We had excavated down that escarpment. We had found 3 cutouts in the wall like a recessed bookcase. We know from the valley north of Jerusalem that the ancient kings and rulers cut these things out in cliffs near populous areas or where a lot of people would be going by, and they put plaques of stone and whatever else in there bearing messages. We found the cutouts. We found the cross holes. If you read in the book of Matthew and the Gospels where it talks about Christ's death, it says the earth shook violently and the rocks were rent. Right to the left of the cross hole, at the base of where Christ died on the cross, the rock was rent. After Christ died, and the centurion stuck his spear into Christ's spleen, and the blood and water came out, it went down through that crack. It went on to the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant that God had arranged to be hidden in that chamber 600 years before Christ died. Now, what is the significance of this? Psalm 77:13 says, "Thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary." On the Day of Atonement, the goat that represented Christ as the sin bearer, after all of the sins were figuratively transferred to its head, was killed. Its blood was taken into the most holy place and sprinkled on the mercy seat. Those folks looked forward to the fact that Christ would die. They confessed their sins on the head of lambs and took the lives of these innocent little animals. We, by faith, believe that Christ has indeed died, and we, in praying to God in Christ's name, receive forgiveness of our sins by faith in that fact. north of the city wall in Jerusalem, several feet below the current ground level, rests a perfect explanation and demonstration of the Old Covenant, the sacrificial system, and the New Covenant. You and I are living in the most exciting time in Earth's history. We have an opportunity to blend our voices with the voices of our fellow believers in raising the last warning message to planet Earth. And let me say this, friend, as we happily contemplate the thought of Christ taking us away from this place and that we do not get struck by the 7 last plagues, if when you think of those pleasant things and the pleasant prospects for the Christian, if you are not concerned for your neighbors and your family and loved ones and other people's families and loved ones, those for whom Christ died, who are every bit as important to him as you and I are, then you won't be whisked off anywhere. We have to have the same loving, tender heart that Christ has. We cannot feel that we are more important, we're better than others. You can be used of God to save souls, and there's no greater privilege and honor that a human being can have than that. So you may not be on the platform tonight, but you're on God's platform, and he wants you to help him. This gentleman has asked about the Ark of the Covenant. He's asked how far the Israeli government has gone in their attempt to make an announcement that it has been discovered. Okay. The Israeli government is convinced that if all of the Jews suddenly were confronted with the fact that the Ark of the Covenant was available, they would want a temple. And they'd go down and destroy the mosque that's on the Temple Mount, because that's where they would want the temple. Well, that's the 3rd most sacred place in Islam. And because the Muslims have been taught what they have been taught, they'd declare a holy war, and there'd be a bloodbath in the Middle East like we've never seen before. So they're trying to work out some way that they can make its discovery known without getting a lot of people killed. Now, at the present time, the plan is that the tables of stone will be put on display around the world. Not in Israel, because it's too easy to blow things up and get a lot of people killed over there. It'll be shown in places like America, Australia, New Zealand, and video of the Ark of the Covenant, good, clear, crisp video that, you know, people will be able to see all of the details, and the blood of Christ and the analysis that proves that this indeed is his blood. In 1 John chapter 5 verses 8 and 9, it says there are 3 that bear witness in earth, the spirit, the water, and the blood. Well, this is the dried serum and the dried platelets of the blood of Christ that are on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. And in verse 9 it says, if you receive the witness of man, the witness of God is greater. And this, referring back to the dried serum and platelets of his Son on the mercy seat, presented to the human heart through the power of the Holy Spirit. it says, is God's testimony of his Son. Now, when our Creator, our God, presents proof to us that his Son died for us, you can be sure that it'll be very persuasive, right? And so that will be done. But one of the angels that is guarding the Ark of the Covenant told me that this will be done. And if I'm faithful, I'll get to be there when the mark of the beast becomes law. Right? So everyone will know exactly what God's requirements are. So they won't, make a mistake about that. So that's what's going to happen to the Ark of the Covenant, and I assure you that as soon as God is ready, the Israeli government will have see their way clear in allowing it to be presented. Thank you, sir. Yes, and we'll have to make shorter answers, I know. Has our work concluded on Noah's Ark? When I first found it, I wanted to totally excavate it. I wanted to put a nice building over to protect it from the elements. I wanted a nice, clear, break-proof window all along one side of it so that from a distance you could see the whole thing. Too many things have been put in a box, and when you get in the box with it, it's right here. So you can't see any of the details. That's what we wanted to do. We worked out 3 different arrangements. None of them worked out. Now, when I pray about these things, I realize that God could have preserved Noah's Ark perfectly intact if he'd wanted to. And it'd just be sitting up there, where everybody could see it. I believe that we're probably finished with the investigation because, as I stated earlier, I think that God's only going to provide enough evidence to convince honest people. Christ told us through his disciples, or while talking to them, that we're not to cast our pearls before swine. Well, we cast our pearls before everybody because I'm not a swine detector. And I do not think that I'm in any position to judge anybody else as to whether, they're hopeless or not. But God is in that position, and he knows who will benefit and who won't. So I believe he will and has, to a great extent, provided all the information needed to convince honest people. And he knows that if he piles up evidence to the heavens, that dishonest people are never going to admit that the truth is the truth. They'll squirm out of it some way or the other. So we may well have done all we're going to do on that and on most of the other things. Yes. Okay, the Ark of the Covenant is very powerful. Am I considering protection of any sort? For myself? Okay. Anyone that goes in? Okay. Well, the Ark of the Covenant is the earthly throne of God. And at this point in time, all of the furnishings of the temples, both the Wilderness Tabernacle and the Temple of Solomon, all that furniture is set out in this chamber exactly as it was in those 2 places. The only difference is there's no veil between the rest of the furnishings and the Ark of the Covenant. What I do before I go in there, I ask the Lord, the Father, in the name and blood of his Son, to forgive me and cleanse me of every sin. The ones I know about and the ones I don't know about. You see, the Bible says even your righteousness is as filthy rags. So there's things we allow and participate in that won't be allowed in a perfect universe. all the things we have here will be replaced by things that are a whole lot nicer and healthier and all of this. But anyway, that's how I protect myself, is by the blood of Jesus. And all of us, that's all the protection we need, is that. And what I tell people, I have a lot of people that think they should be able to go in and have a look. God is up there, and he's not hard of hearing or retarded. He understands all languages, and if they ask him to see it in the name and blood of his Son, and he wants them to see it, he can make the arrangements. He can show them where it is and all of that. There are, at this point in time, about the same number of people that I've seen angels that have died because in one way or the other they're trying to mess these discoveries up. And other people have had accidents. I've had people that were on the way to my meetings to try to disrupt them and all of that, and have an accident a block away, end up in the hospital instead of disrupting the meeting. And so God has his hand over these things, because this once he's not going to allow anyone to interfere. That's in Jeremiah 16:19 through 21. He says, "Behold, this once I will show them my hand and my might, and I will show them that my name is the Lord." And that's what's happening tonight. God is sharing his last message with you and giving you the best opportunity that all-wise, all-loving, and all-powerful God can give you. Okay, thank you. I'll try to get this side, and then I'll go up that side. Anyone else back through here with a question? Sir. Okay, what about that one? All right, what this gentleman basically is asking, listen carefully, sir, and nod if this is right. I don't want to get your question wrong. He is basically saying that there's been some recent reports that people have been inside Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat, that they took a sample out of it, and anyway, is that basically, all right, what about that? All right, Satan doesn't want you to believe the truth. All right, he doesn't care what you believe as long as it's not the truth. So he has raised up many stories about Noah's Ark being on Mount Ararat. Now, what this man is referring to, I think, is that approximately 2 to 3 years ago, time passes so quickly anymore that it's hard for me to keep up with it. But CBS ran a 2-hour live special on Noah's Ark. And on this special, a man by the name of Jamal showed a piece of timber that he said he personally took from Noah's Ark. And he also said that he and a friend were in there, had all kinds of pictures of it. But when they came out, his friend was trying to get a wide-angle picture, got too close to the edge of the mountain, fell off and died, and the camera with him. Well, what happened here, and I'll try to cover this real quickly. This man's name was Jamal. He was an actor out in California, still is as far as I know. He and a man by the name of LaRue. Now, I see a few folks whose hair color are the same as mine. You may remember Lash LaRue, or you may not. He was a cowboy hero, Hollywood style, years ago. Anyway, his grandson and this Jamal decided they would pull a fast one on creationists. So Jamal took his video camera, went out to a train switching yard near where he lived. He chopped a piece of wood from a railroad cross tie. Are you familiar with railroad cross ties? Okay. Some countries use metal ones, don't use wood ones, so I didn't know how it was here. Anyway, he took that, he took it to his apartment, got a big saucepan, put that in there with teriyaki sauce and wine and a bunch of other stuff and boiled it until it turned black and got wrinkled and all of that. And then he took it out with these tweezers that you and I get boiled corn out of a pot with. And then he used his hair dryer to dry it off real good. And then he took this to Cellier, the fellow who was making this 2-hour live special, and he told him this story, that he and his friend had gone out there and some Kurds took him right into the ark, and he got all of these pictures and got this piece of wood off the ark. Well, Cellier smelled a rat. So he told Jamal, he said, you need to go and talk to someone who's a recognized authority on Noah's Ark. You get them to vouch for you that your information is accurate, and then I'll put it in this video, in my 2-hour special. So Jamal had studied John Morris's books and his maps and his stories and all of this. The man's an actor. See, so that's what he does. He studies things so he can play a part convincingly. So he went to John Morris, the head of ICR, the Institute for Creation Research in America. You have a similar organization here, rather in Australia. And he told his story to John Morris. And John Morris went with him to Cellier and said, I will stake my reputation on the fact that this man has been in Noah's Ark and that this is wood from Noah's Ark. So Cellier said, okay. He put it in the 2-hour live special. It aired. Immediately afterwards, Jamal and LaRue called a news conference. They showed the journalists the video of where the wood actually came from. And Jamal said, I've never been in Turkey in my life. And the journalist said, well, why did you do all of this? And they said, just to show how gullible creationists are. All right? Now, the journalist asked John Morris, how come you vouched for this guy? And he said, well, I didn't think he'd lie to me. Now then, John has had some very unkind things to say about myself and my research methods and that. Would it not have been proper for John to ask Jamal to show him his passport with his Turkish visa in it before he laid his reputation on the line by guaranteeing the truthfulness of Jamal's story? It seems that that would have been the minimum thing that John should have done, to me. But anyway, that's the whole story on that. There's Time magazine put a page in that told the whole thing. Showed that it was a hoax. There's all kinds of stories, all of which are made up. There's touched up photographs. There's people who say that these that formation is not unusual, that it's typical, and that there's many of them all over the place. And Marty here, who's the geologist, Marty, would you just comment about the difference between that one and the usual obstructed flow patterns that we see around?
Basically, a flow pattern, the easiest thing to think of is a raindrop. Anything that has flow moving around it, whereas a raindrop falls, it has air that moves around it. The bottom side is rounded, the top part is pointed. The flow always goes in that direction, so if you see the sharp pointed, you know that that's going to the back and the flow is coming from the other direction. Well, the Noah's Ark site is a perfect flow pattern shape. It has a rounded end and a pointed end. However, it's just opposite for the direction of flow. In other words, the pointed end is facing the flow and the rounded end is to the back of the flow, which basically is an impossibility for it to be a natural flow pattern.
Thank you. Also, we use subsurface interface radar system, as you saw. We collected a piece of deck timber, as you saw in the video. Now, we have all this in a museum in America, and I'd be just delighted if any of you would want to come visit us there. So we could show you all of this. Also, we do tours to the Middle East, so if anybody wants to do that, we can help you with that. But anyway, that takes care of that. I see a hand way back there. Okay, sir. He is just kind of repeating what I said earlier, that the Japanese were not able to build a pyramid using the inclined plane method. And he asked if I believe that what we showed you here is the method by which the pyramids were built, and the answer is yes. The director of antiquities in Egypt said that he believed that was how it was done. Now, I've had people say, well, Wyatt, what on earth does how pyramids were built have to do with the gospel? You'd be amazed at how much credibility that gives us. You know, a lot of people say, well, the other stuff's not real archaeology, it's something else. Well, by definition, archaeology is the digging up of ancient things, you know. And so we are archaeologists, but that gives us credibility also, since Joseph, a Bible character, built the first one. That gets you into Bible history real quick. So we found that this helps us to persuade some people who would otherwise go unpersuaded if this weren't included. Okay, thank you. Anybody else back on this side? Yeah. And okay. Now we're going to do something here. Rather, I'm not, but my friend Jonathan will in just a minute. But we'll get the questions on this side. Just a minute, Jonathan. I want to do these. I saw some hands over here. Yes, sir. Okay, do we have any other projects in mind? We have found the remains of the Tower of Babel, and we're doing a bit of documenting on that. On our next visit over this way, we should probably have some video on that. I'm hoping that our next visit we can bring the tables of stone with us, but we're working on that and on locating some giant human skeletal parts. We found some of them. I'd like to find some that are a little more recognizable by people that, you know, aren't doctors and folks like that. Okay, I believe you had a question. Right. Yeah. Good. I do have some comments on that. I don't know who told you that these men said that. Now, well, we have a written report from John Baumgartner after this was done, and they found limonite, which is fossilized iron, in these core samples, and that was not found on test core samples done outside the formation. Mr. Fenner did a subsurface radar scan with an SIR-8. Now, the difference between what he used and what I used is the difference between an automatic camera and one that the old style, where you have to do your own focusing. Now, we focused at different depths down through the object and found deck timbers, chambers, and you saw Tom Finner's boss on the video here tonight saying that was not a natural object. You saw that with your own eyes. All right, just a minute. Let me finish this. And when Finner's machine was set on automatic to target the densest material in the boat, he got a perfect read of the metallic ballast material in the bottom of the boat. It was so impressive that geologists who don't want to believe that this is Noah's Ark said it's quite obvious that the floor of an ancient seabed upthrusted in that area, and that it was just a coincidence that it was the exact size and shape of Noah's Ark. Okay? And so anyway, that's the answer to your question. Thank you kindly. No, sir. No, sir, we're not here for a debate. You had your question, I answered the question. Just have a seat. That's what I just said. The drillings had limolite, which is fossilized iron. That doesn't know. The report said that this is not natural. They also drilled some core samples outside the object and found none of that material. Okay, we've done the same thing with our radar. There is nothing outside. Finner did that and said there's nothing outside. Okay? So that is the answer to that question. Anybody else? Sir. All right, the middle part of it goes up. We have a book. In the back we have order sheets. There's a book there called the Discovery Volume. All right? But briefly, if you have a house that has 1-story height on one end, 1-story height on the other end, and then you have a 2-story section next to these, adjacent to the 1-story, and then in the middle you have a 3-story section, and they decay away or they burn, whatever. By measuring the depth of what's left, you can tell that one part was lower than the other. In other words, you can tell that the structure had 3 different levels by measuring the depth of what's left. All right? So on Noah's Ark, it was a 3-story structure. And we measured the depth of the deposit all along the length, and that told us where the different decks began and ended. We also did this from side to side. And the reason that it's higher in the middle is because that was where the 3-story section was located. Thank you very much. A good question. All right. All right. Yes, sir. Okay, the young man wants to know, is there a natural explanation for what happened? Is that basically what? Okay. This is, shall we say, amazing occurrence out there. There are 5 cities that are separated from one another by miles along that valley. These cities are totally turned to ash, and in this ash are just like black pepper in gravy or something. They're peppered with these sulfur balls. There is none on either side of these cities. There's none on the uphill side. There's a little on the downhill side because flash flooding has washed a little bit loose. But the targeting was absolutely perfect. Now, there is no evidence that this came from volcanoes, because we've gone to Hawaii, and of course you have many volcanoes here, so you can check it out for yourself. We went to the Smithsonian Institute of Natural History, and they were kind enough to allow us to look through all of their specimens of sulfur, and there were none like this at all. It does not occur anywhere else on Earth. Now, God has the ability to just create sulfur above something and drop it on it. And I personally think that that's the most likely explanation, that he just simply created it, dropped it, and it ignited as it came through the atmosphere because of the friction.
What a privilege to meet such a man of God, and a man who has been making history in our day. He is a real life, genuine Christian Indiana Jones. I have spent, and let me say this to anybody who, like our friend down in the audience, a dear man, I'm sure, but let me say this, I investigated fully everything before I accepted Ron. I was against him. I had that magazine in front of me, and I went out to the whole world with it. And men like Dr. Bayraktartan in Turkey, who worked with that Baumgartner man, I have on tape from him just a few months ago saying, this is Noah's Ark, we're going out to do some more samples in the next few weeks. It keeps going, and the Turks have accepted it. And I know that Dr. Ekrem Archaeological, the leading Turkish archaeologist, I have him on video. It's on one of the videos out here, saying, this is a boat, it must be protected. Now, what boat can be up in the mountains so high, weighing about 34,000 tons? How did it get there? What brought it there, except water?